Hey, everybody, and welcome to our Big Dave Show virtual field trip number 16. How about that? I got my spring training Reds hat on from last year, and that means I'm wanting an early spring. And nobody can tell us if there's going to be one of those better than our guest today, and we really appreciate him coming in. This is going to be a little bit different of a field trip. We were supposed to go to Hawksworth Blood Center on Monday, and Ashley was going to have blood given or drawn or donate blood for the first time. But then with the storm and everything that Steve can talk about here in a minute, they decided to move it because they felt they might be understaffed and everything else. So that's going to be next Monday. But since everybody's talking about the weather right now, we thought no better person to bring on than our friend, really great guy. I call him the Chief. But he is Chief Meteorologist Steve Raleigh from Channel 9 WCPO. And let me bring him in here. Hey, Steve, how are you?
Hey, good morning, Dave. It's a pleasure to be with you, and right back at you. I don't know a better guy in town and someone who's more community-oriented. You talk about Hawksworth, you know what they always say, we don't mean to needle you and get caught with our pints down. So I'm happy to actually pinch hit here.
All right. Well, we're going to let the kids start asking some questions, and I hope you're ready and you might have an almanac ready to go. We're going to start with the biggest kid I know, Statman over here joins us. Stat, what is your question for Steve this morning?
Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right. So I got all my technology working. So I'd like to know, what does it take to get a snow day in Cincinnati?
Well,
some days you get snow and we don't get a snow day, and other days,
Stat, you know as well as I do, you got to turn your pajamas inside out. You have to make sure you leave out just a little bit of sugar out the back door and all the other ways to make sure you get a snow day. And the problem is, just as we're doing now in Zoom, boy, those superintendents, that word virtual works very well as opposed to the word snow day these years.
Sure.
So I think we're going to need a really big snow like we had, a week ago on Monday there to really start bringing folks or allowing them to stay home and not having to do any work.
Okay, well, Mrs. Gallagher's class, third grade class at St. Catherine of Siena, they got to go to lunch here in a minute, so they're wanting to get their questions in. Let's see, the first one I see, how do you know the weather is coming? That's a pretty basic one.
No, but a good one. What we do is every day I take a look on the internet at all these different projections of what these supercomputers say are going to happen. Now, we take a look at that, and everybody sees the same thing, but meteorologists then, in what we do is we analyze how we think that will play given, and here's the most important part, once those models come out, they're generally wrong or behind already because the atmosphere has already changed. And there becomes the kind of looking over or analysis of determining the forecast.
The fine tuning, if you will. What is the ratio of snow to rain? Meaning if we were to get 1 inch of rain, how much snow would that be?
That does vary, but we use the standard at 10-to-1 for a liquid equivalent to snow. So in other words, and this is a good time to talk about this, just the other night where we ended up overnight getting anywhere from 4, 5, or 6 inches, that was a ratio more of about 15-to-1. And that has to do with a lot of properties, but the single one is cold air. Cold air can't hold as much moisture. So the colder it is, the better snow producer it becomes. So if you want a lot of snow, you want the cold air around.
Now, Steve, before we get to some more questions, so the other night, everybody had us, and this was a meteorologist's nightmare because you guys had talked about this winter storm, a lot of models. I mean, there were models all over the place. And you guys, that's your job, like you said. You got to pick which one you think, okay, this, and we're going to work on this. This is what it looks like. Pretty much 10 to 12 inches. But then something happened, and this happens a lot, and it's a meteorologist's nightmare here in Cincinnati because not only are we right there on the old Mason-Dixon line, we seem to be, that also could be renamed the rain-snow line a lot of times for a lot of systems.
Well, you make a good point. There's no question about it, Dave. What happens specifically, and I won't get too technical, but I like using this analogy, and it might be really good for all our school-age friends who are watching, and that is imagine an Oreo cookie. Because the top half of that Oreo is nice and cold. And the bottom half is nice and cold, but in the middle, there's that little change. And that little change in the atmosphere is warm air. So when the snow comes down, it's snow out of the clouds, then it hits that nice creamy center. The problem is it's a little bit warmer, and it melts the snow, and then it refreezes the snow before it gets to the surface. And so that's what happened over Cincinnati. We did not expect that to happen. We knew it was going to be off to the east and southeast of us. We felt it was going to be like chocolate cookie the whole time. And so as a result, that didn't happen. That little warm air was in the middle, or that creamy center. And so that's why we got so much sleet earlier, because the other half of that, when it came in, the 2 rounds that we had discussed came in right as scheduled with 5 and 6 inches of snow. And that would have put us up at that 10 inches.
Sure.
But it didn't happen. And that's because meteorology is an inexact science. And you got to remember that.
Yeah, and it is not the meteorologist's fault when something doesn't happen. And I know that's too late, Steve, but God bless you and all the local meteorologists in Cincinnati, because you'll take it on the chin, but it's just not most people appreciate. And
how do you think I got this big dimple here over the years, man?
95%, 99% of the people appreciate the job you guys do. Tyler wants to know, what is the difference between a low weather system and a high weather system?
It's good. Yeah, high and a low pressure. In general, high pressure brings a clear and pleasant day. On the other side, a low pressure generally creates clouds, rain, or snow, or some kind of precipitation. Those are the key elements of those. There's more. There's a wind flow around it. A low has winds that run counterclockwise, and a high has winds that run clockwise. So those are the differences. But generally, you'll want high pressure, except in the winter where, like we're experiencing, some very cold air coming down with that high.
Sure. Let's see here. Deanne wants to know, what is the highest, I guess she's talking about snow total. What's the highest snow total we've ever had in Cincinnati?
Well, in the 24-hour period, it runs to just about 12 inches. Right now, we're in snow in general. For the season, we're way above normal. We're at 27 inches just this season alone. 22 is the average. One of the largest we've experienced in about the last couple of decades, right off the top of my head, was about 5 or 6 years ago. We got 48 inches of snow. So if you remember that, every snow that came along was really big.
That was over the season. I seem to remember I moved here in 1998, and I think in the fall of 98, and I remember, I think in the spring of 98, there was a 17-inch single snow in March. And it probably didn't hang around very long because it was March, but in one day we got 17 inches.
You're right on the money. And that's a good memory, because March is the date where we had the single largest ever. It might have been 17 in your backyard. I think officially, and there's an official way to gather snow, but I think officially it was right around 15 inches.
Yeah. That's a lot, but okay, let's see. Another question from Miss Gallagher's class. How is snow made? That's a good, you kind of touched on that with the other thing from the storm the other day, but how does it just start as snow?
Well, actually, all precipitation, if you want to get technical, really starts as snow, because everything starts in the clouds as ice crystals. So when there's precipitation out of a cloud, it depends on what the air is doing underneath that cloud. And so as a result, like I was talking with the Oreo cookie, it depends on whether it's cold from top to bottom and we get snow, or whether that Oreo cookie is there and there's a wedge of warm air, and then we can get different variants depending on how much that warm air is in between. So it really all starts as snow out of the clouds.
So that going right next to the next question is, somebody wants to know how hail is made. So basically, and I run into this problem with my son, Darren. He'll say he's 12 years old and it'll be sleeting in the winter. And he says, "Hey, Dad, it's hailing." And I'm like, well, that's really sleet, but is there really a difference? It may be warm outside. It's basically the same thing, right?
It's a piece of ice. There's no question. That is the similarity. The way it's made is different. Meaning, as we talked about the sleet having to refreeze before the ground, in a hail situation, the winds are so violent going up, what we call updrafts, so winds coming out of the ground into the clouds. So if you imagine my hand as a cloud right here, winds are coming up into the cloud. So when that water comes together and starts forming ice in there, it keeps getting shoved up into the atmosphere, and we talk about like maybe a golf ball size hail or a pea size hail. Those winds determine what the size of that hail is going to be, meaning the longer it stays up in that cloud and it keeps bumping into all that water and gets bigger and bigger and bigger because it's held up, and eventually the storm is either so strong and it can't hold that piece of hail up, or it keeps going. So when we talk about maybe in Oklahoma City where we have baseball size hail, those clouds are so tall, that water just keeps coming together, creating ice, and eventually it can't hold it anymore and falls. For us, usually pea size or maybe a ping pong if we get that big. But that's because our clouds don't grow to the same size as maybe out in some parts of the country.
Okay. Now, this kind of brings us to the next thing, because I know that in situations where there is a tornado, there's a lot of hail, and that would stand to what you just said. The winds are swirling around, and that's basically a tornado. Christian Johnson wants to know, are tornadoes common in Ohio?
They are absolutely common in Ohio. There's been a lot of studies done. There's two tornado alleys. One that we know about in the middle of the nation that a lot of folks consider, from Texas to Oklahoma through the Plain States. But also there's been a lot of studies that if this is the main branch, we're this other branch over here. So yes, they are common. And one of the things to remember is they can happen at any time of the year. In fact, we just had one in the country in North Carolina just in the last 36 hours. And today, as recently as today, there's tornado watches up in Florida. So they can happen at any time. In Ohio, certainly they are prevalent.
And now I want to ask you this, Steve, because the first year I moved here, the next spring, I think it was 1999, we had those tornadoes that hit. They started kind of in Addiston, and then they jumped up over the city and landed back down in Blue Ash. And I always wondered, because a year before that, I was in Nashville when one went through downtown Nashville. That's where I lived, and I lived through that. And Nashville is considerably flatter than Cincinnati is. Do the hills, because that was making a beeline for the downtown, but then there's all these hills that it hits. Does that cause a tornado to fly up into the air, or just go back up a little bit higher in the atmosphere until it gets to a flatter area it can come down on? Does that have anything to do with it?
Honestly, there have been a lot of conjecture, but no studies done on two things. One is the river, and number two is because of the hills that we have, the 7 hills of Cincinnati. And a lot of people, and I've always said myself, that someone could make a nice master's or doctorate degree on doing a study on just that to make these conjectures. Because over the time period, I know you guys have been there a long time. I've been here a long time as well. There are so many times where we see that severe weather coming right up through the Ohio Valley, and it either splits, or as you talked about, somehow there's a difference in those storms that then they rise up or split out, as I say. It's very interesting, but there's no hard concrete data, and there's only so much we frankly know about tornadoes in general anyway.
Okay, guys, we got a lot of questions coming in here. Speaking of tornadoes, of course, you can predict tornadoes, and every year it seems to get a little easier with the technology there. But I mean, they'll never get them down to what's the warning now? It used to be about a minute. Now it's probably 5 or 6 minutes, maybe.
Yeah, I think the actual warning is 7 minutes, 7 to 11, I think is where it is right now for the National Weather Service. But that's considerably more than we've ever had in our life. So the folks in Oklahoma City have gotten it up to about 19. So there is time for at least to take cover these days. Keep in mind, we just never used to have even that much of a warning.
And speaking of tornadoes, someone wants to know, how can you predict an earthquake? I'm sure that's kind of a different area, but meteorologists probably don't deal with earthquakes as much. Those are geologists and seismologists and things of that nature. But I mean, they're trying to do that as well now.
Trying to, and they've had limited success. There have been some studies where they've been able to do it over a small area, but you talk about your limited knowledge. It is only a minute or two, I think, that geologists have known that. So it's of little help, but they're obviously trying to progress that science.
That question was from Colin. Let's see if we got a bunch more. Jimmy H wants to know, and Steve, I don't know if you've ever worked in an area prone to hurricanes, but how often can hurricanes appear? Jimmy H wants to know.
Yeah, no, actually, I did in a way. I worked in Jackson, Mississippi. I worked in Charlotte, North Carolina, and frankly, I've covered about a dozen and a half. And I covered Category 5s and everything else. Predicting hurricanes is, you're able to do it. The problem is you can't predict them reliably. So you can see the formation of the hurricane happening. You can see with all of the technology and the hurricane hunters, those are the planes that fly into hurricanes and drop this kind of metal tube down in there so that way they can determine what's happening within the hurricane. The problem becomes is the actual forecasting is not there yet. We're getting better at it, and the folks at the National Hurricane Center who dedicate their lives to it do a great job. And we have narrowed it down to a cone, which rarely, although it does happen, the hurricane kind of moves out of that general path area. So we have honed it down, but it's not perfect yet.
And hurricanes, Butch wants to know, how do hurricanes happen? Basically, they're out over the warm, salt water or whatever, ocean water. Is that what brings it to the point where it's just a
That's where it starts.
Monster?
Absolutely. At different times of the year, different parts of the ocean, because they're warmer than other times, it needs 80-degree water. It needs a general strong updraft, and it just creates a thunderstorm. But also it needs a certain amount of atmosphere going on above the storm in a certain way with the winds. And I say that because in certain times of the year, other factors can play into limiting hurricane development. So we watch for that. That's happening actually over in the Pacific, off the coast of California. Down in the tropics, there's a couple of phenomenons that happen that can either help hurricanes or kind of suppress them. But the bottom line is you need the warm waters and the updraft that's happening.
Jamie wants to know, if it barely snows in a year, then does that mean the cloud is holding the snow and next year it will be more likely to have a blizzard or more snow than usual?
Boy, the folks at Perfect North Slopes, Jamie, probably would love to hear that's the case, but no, each individual cloud mass is there, dies, and just other ones reform.
All right. Christian wants to know, speaking of tornadoes, how many tornado sirens are there in Cincinnati?
There's I think there's 80 or 90 in Hamilton County. I think there could be more. I don't know the exact number. And honestly, and this is not good, they don't always have the funds to keep all of them operational. That's why it's important for every single person to either have an app on their phone or a weather radio in their house. For me, I have both. Quite frankly, while I love the technology of an app, because I'm old school, I like to set the radio up and it just goes. And all of a sudden you hear that siren go and there's something important. So it's something to consider.
Okay. Let's see. I had a good one here I wanted to get to that I saw. I'm trying to keep up with all of them. Bridget wants to know, how do you know when you are pointing at on the green screen without seeing what you were pointing at? How do you know what you're pointing at on the green screen without seeing what you're pointing at? And that's
Bridget, great question.
That's probably harder to learn than some of the weather things you had to get done in school.
Well, I tell you, what happens in very, very simple is you see that speaker that's over here for this. Imagine that's just a television replaying what you see at home. So if I was to stand here and I turn sideways, I now can see what you see at home. So that's how I know I have one of those televisions on both sides. So if I was to do the weather right here and this was a green screen, when I turn and go, oh, it's this area of high pressure, I can see where I'm pointing this way and I can see where I'm pointing that way. Now, I'll tell you this, after 38 years of doing it, I know if I point to right here, you know where I'm pointing right to Minnesota right now. I can do this without a map behind me because I've done it for so long.
All right, if we were looking at the greater Cincinnati area, what would be on the A on weather behind you right there?
The A, it would be, I'd have to get out of the way, see, because I'm right smack dab in the middle of the map. So I'd have to go like this and point right here.
Good deal. Keep some more questions coming in. Diane says that you broadcast at one point the weather from the top of the Golden Gate Bridge. Now, wait, this has been coming up as a theme through the chat section here. I never knew this about you. Please share that story.
Well, what happened is when I was in San Francisco's weather is obviously a lot more calm than here. So we always look for ways to be outside to do weather and make it more interesting because, quite frankly, the forecast through much of the summer was fog in the morning and sun in the afternoon. And that was pretty much it for 3 months. So we were looking for other ways to make weather interesting, as I say. So one day I just came up with this, anybody ever done weather off the Golden Gate Bridge? And they said no. So we contacted the recreation department, the folks, the National Recreation Department. And what happens is that's 750 feet off of the deck. And then the deck is another couple of hundred feet. So what happened is because the bridge was built so long ago and they don't have a lot of money, they refurbished one elevator that's about the size of a small broom closet. So myself and the photographer, it takes 45 minutes because the elevator is so slow to go from the bottom to the top. And so I took a bunch of gear, he took a bunch of gear. We went up very early into the afternoon. And you have to remember, it's not as kind of scary as it might sound because the bridge at the top is nearly as wide as the bridge at the bottom. And the bridge at the bottom has 4 lanes on one side and 4 on the other. So when you're walking along there, it's not quite as wide, but it's not like you're looking over doing one of these numbers going, I'll just stay here, thank you. So there's actually plenty of room. And so we did our weather from the top of the Golden Gate Bridge. We also did it from the top of the Bay Bridge, which was a little bit more fun because we had to put on one of those straps that go around your waist and have clips on each side. So we had to walk up the giant cabling because they don't have any way of getting to the top of the spires on each side. So what we did is we clipped each side and we walked up and re-clipped and walked up to go up. That was one of those, I'm going to go very slowly now moments. But because of the pitch of the actual cabling and it's so wide, it wasn't as bad as it sounds.
Sounds exciting, though. I'd love to see that. Okay, so I'm gonna combine a couple of more questions, and then Stat's got a really good one I think everybody's gonna want the answer to. But we have a lot more coming in about tornadoes and stuff. But Deani, and we also have let's see. Deani wants to know, is it fun doing the weather forecast? And it sounds like it definitely is because you got to climb a bridge.
That's there are 2 things, and it's a great question, and it comes up a lot. There are 2 things that make me very happy to be a meteorologist. One is every day I come in, there's a new challenge. It's different every single day. And number 2 is it has given me the ability to do things like I just described that I've never had would otherwise have a chance to do. And so those 2 things, Dehani, make it something that I find pleasurable to this day after 38 years.
Okay. All right. So Jason, Statman, we'll close it out with this one because everybody, whenever you see a beautiful rainbow, everybody wants to know, okay, how did that happen? When we get, maybe if you have a second, how does these double rainbows happen?
Sure. Number one, this will remind everybody about meteorology because whenever you see a rainbow, okay, there's always sun to your back. Because what it's actually doing is refracting all of the crystals that are in the sky at that moment. So those colorations happen across the sky. The sun will always be to your back and whatever moisture is always to your forward. And what it's doing is those sun rays are hitting against tiny ice crystals. And those tiny ice crystals are all across the area. And the reason why that's happening is a wind flow pattern that's going on creates that kind of bowing effect. And when you get a double rainbow, you end up seeing or knowing that there are 2 types of atmospheric things going on. Some wind at the surface and wind that's aloft, so those ice crystals are being blown and falling at the same time. So it creates that effect, and that's how you get a rainbow.
And Marissa, who's really paying attention, said the ice crystals are acting as prisms.
That's even better. Even better. And if you got the idea of a prism, then you know why those colorations are happening all across the sky.
Riley has a final question here. Is it easy to be a meteorologist? I think the other night's winter storm might answer that question for Riley, but we'll close out with that from Riley to Raleigh here.
Okay, well, that's a great question. The answer is no, but that is some of the challenge and, quite frankly, the fun. Anybody who's a meteorologist, whoever said, I've gotten every forecast right, would not exactly be telling the whole story. So, yes, it's not always easy, but I have enjoyed it, Riley.
Yeah, very nice. Okay, very cool. Well, Steve Raleigh, thank you so much for joining us today. I know you've had a very busy week, and real quick, I mean, we got another little system coming in here starting tonight. Can you give us just the forecast for
Sure.
Wednesday night into Thursday? What do we got?
Sure. Right now, it looks like, in fact, we're probably going to call for a 9 first warning weather alert day, because I think we're going to get a minor to really a minor snow. It's looking like 1 to 3 inches, maybe a little of that wintry mix in some areas that would be east or southeast of greater Cincinnati proper. Not going to be a lot, but there will be some in this one.
At this point, though, I got to be honest, Steve, I don't have anywhere to put 1 to 3 inches in my drive. I'm running out of spaces to put snow.
Yeah, I think everybody is. Yesterday, when I shoveled out my driveway again, my mounds are starting to be so high. You know, it's. I might need to employ Stat to come over, because he's a younger, strapping man who can take it for me.
There we go, Stat. You ready to do that? Yeah, he's ready.
How much does it pay? I mean, I don't, spread salt for free here.
Well, I live on the west side, and we believe, I can definitely give you like buck and a half an hour.
$1.50. That's more than we pay him at 105. So good.
Yeah. If I could get my car out of the driveway to your house, I'll be there.
Fair enough.
Steve Raleigh, thank you so much. I know it's been a very busy week, and it's going to continue to be so much so. We just count on my Reds hat I put on, my spring training hat. Spring will be here soon.
I saw them out there, and I'm telling you, shorts and a T-shirt can't come fast enough.
No, they can't. Steve Raleigh, thank you so much, buddy.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You got it. And everybody will thank Steve again there. And tell you what, next Monday, or next Wednesday rather, we're going to be watching Ashley at Hawksworth Blood Center donate blood for the first time in her life. So she's a little bit nervous, but we want to thank Hawksworth, of course, is one of our sponsors of the Big Dave Show virtual field trips. This one's a little different today, but I think it was a lot of fun. Also, thanks to Skyline Chili and Grippo's Potato Chips. And everybody go have yourself a good day, and hopefully you get out and play in all the snow Mother Nature's given us here. So we'll see you guys next time. Sign up at V105.com for next week's trip to Hawksworth Blood Center. See you guys.